Election day. It's right around the corner. And this one feels, well, let's just say the stakes are high, especially when it comes to, the future of education.
Policies we're talking about now, those have a ripple effect. They impact our kids for years down the line. And with all the noise out there, school funding debates and teacher shortages, it can feel overwhelming.
It really can, and honestly, that's what drew me to this newsletter from Setzer Group. They're really trying to get a handle on all these huge problems in education.
I think what I find interesting about them is, this Wayfinder way they talk about, it's more than just like dealing with change, which, let's be real, that's a minefield these days. They want to use their know-how and resources to really make a difference when it comes to things like equity and making sure everyone has a chance in education.
Okay, color me intrigued. How does that work in practice, this wayfinding thing? The newsletter mentioned working with communities, using technology, but what does that actually look like on the ground?
Well, they're putting a lot of energy into backing organizations like Durham Delivers, for example. They're doing really groundbreaking work, getting people to actually vote, especially in communities that haven't really had their voices heard,
That's so important, especially now. Early voting is one way to push back against those voter suppression tactics, right?
Yeah.
The ones that always seem to hit those same communities the hardest.
You got it. And what I find fascinating about Durham Delivers is how they're doing it. It's not just the old-fashioned knocking on doors. They're using targeted ads and, get this, something called tripling software to get people active and voting early, all through their existing networks.
Wait, back up a sec. Tripling software. Now that's a new one on me. Tell me more.
It's this really wild system, right? Uses data to find potential voters who are already connected to their volunteers. It's kind of like social media, but for, civic engagement. They can tap into those connections, get their message amplified, and boom, more people voting early.
Okay, that's brilliant. Using the power of, just knowing people to increase voter turnout. So that's their support for groups like Durham Delivers. But what about Setzer Group's own, hands-on work when it comes to education? They're based in North Carolina, right?
They are, and their newsletter doesn't sugarcoat it. It paints a pretty stark picture of what education is up against in that state, and sadly, a lot of it feels way too familiar if you look at the rest of the country.
Yeah, it's like looking in a mirror, unfortunately.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest challenges they're highlighting?
Well, teacher pay is a huge one. North Carolina is way down there, like 38th in the country. The Setzer Group, they're pushing for higher salaries, which makes sense. But they're also emphasizing better professional development, recognizing that investing in teachers is the same as investing in the future.
Absolutely. I mean, you can't attract good people and expect them to stay if you don't treat them with the respect they deserve. They are professionals, after all. What else is on their radar?
Funding, obviously. North Carolina is 48th in how much they spend per student. Can you believe that? Fewer resources, less support, and teachers are left carrying the weight, even though they're already stretched thin. Setzer Group is pushing for funding that's actually fair, based on what schools actually need. It could be a game changer.
It's like you pull one thread, and this whole web of interconnected problems unravels. Teacher pay tied to funding. Funding tied to, what we actually value as a society.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I think the Setzer Group's approach is really smart. It's not just about throwing money at the problem. It's about tackling those deeper issues, the ones that create these inequalities in the first place,
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, look at their position on voucher programs. They're completely against using public funds for private schools. Their argument is that it just weakens public education as a whole.
And the reasoning being?
Well, it comes down to this idea that every single child, no matter where they come from, deserves a quality education. That's what they're all about, making sure everyone has a shot.
And that's not just a K-12 thing, right?
Yeah.
Their newsletter mentions something about really pushing for expanded pre-K.
100%. They're really emphasizing that early childhood education is key. It sets kids up for success, not just in school, but in life. And that benefits everyone in the long run.
Like that old saying, start them young. Man, the earlier we invest in our kids' education, the better off we all are.
Couldn't agree more. And speaking of investing in the future, they're also advocating for more diversity among teachers.
Because seeing someone who looks like you in front of the classroom, that matters.
It makes a huge difference. When kids have teachers from diverse backgrounds, it impacts everything. How they feel like they belong, how well they do in school, even their overall happiness.
It's that feeling of being seen, right?
Yeah.
Having role models who get you, who can help you through those tough stages of growing up.
Right, and it challenges the way things have always been done, pushing for an education system that's truly fair and inclusive for everyone.
So we've talked about Setzer Group's advocacy, the big picture stuff,
Yeah.
but they're also getting involved in specific races, right? The newsletter mentioned supporting certain candidates.
Oh, yeah, they're definitely not shying away from that. They're throwing their support behind Maurice Mo-Green. He's got a solid history of fighting for public education.
They specifically called out his commitment to things like raising teacher salaries, fixing up schools, making sure more kids have access to early childhood education. All good things.
Right. Seems promising. On the other hand, they're pointing to some pretty concerning things being said by candidates like Michelle Morrow.
But what's the issue with Morrow?
Well, they're highlighting her stance on voucher programs, for one, and the fact that she's voted against increasing education funding in the past.
Do your homework. Understand what these candidates stand for on the issues that matter to you.
Exactly. Informed voting, right. We can't just go off of party lines or some catchy slogan. We got to dig deeper, see where they stand on education, healthcare, the economy, all of it.
Which brings us to this whole misinformation thing, right?
Yeah.
Setzer Group's newsletter, they dedicate a whole section to debunking the idea that voter fraud is this big, scary problem, a narrative often used to, let's face it, discourage people from voting.
It's a classic, unfortunately. But they do a good job of showing how ridiculously rare voter fraud actually is, and they back it up with actual numbers. Like, they cite this Brennan Center report. It found that the real rate of voter fraud is something like, get this, 0.00025%.
Are you kidding me? What about those claims of thousands of fake votes?
All smoke and mirrors, my friend. The Setzer Group, they point to a Washington Post analysis that found only 31 credible cases of voter impersonation out of over 1 billion votes. 1 billion.
That's what, a drop in the ocean? A grain of sand on the beach?
You said it. And even if you look at individual states, the numbers are still tiny. They mentioned the Ohio Secretary of State, a Republican, by the way. He found only 75 instances of potential double voting out of nearly 6 million ballots.
So it's pretty clear these claims of widespread voter fraud are
A big, fat nothing burger. But here's the thing, they still have a real impact. Even when they're totally bogus, these stories, they chip away at people's faith in the whole system, especially folks who are already facing hurdles trying to vote in the first place.
It's all connected, huh? The voter suppression, the misinformation, the way schools and marginalized communities are constantly getting the short end of the stick when it comes to funding. It's like the deck is stacked against the people who need the most help.
And that's exactly why what Setzer Group is doing is so important. They're not just pointing fingers, they're actually offering ways to fight back. Like supporting Durham Delivers, they're tackling voter suppression head-on, empowering people, making communities stronger.
Speaking of Durham Delivers, they're the ones with that super innovative tripling software, right? And the one designed to get more people out to vote. But how expensive is a campaign like that to actually run? I mean, are we talking big bucks?
You'd be amazed. The CEO of Setzer Group, he said they're doing it all for about half of what a single TV ad would cost. Talk about bang for your buck.
That's incredible, using tech and data to make a real difference, and on a shoestring budget, no less.
Smart, strategic, and effective, right. And here's the best part. They're not trying to keep it a secret. They want others to learn from what they're doing and do it even better.
Which leads us to their call to action. The newsletter ends with a pretty powerful message to their readers.
They don't mince words, that's for sure. They want anyone who cares about education to step up, and they give you a bunch of different ways to get involved.
Like donating to groups like Durham Delivers, especially for folks who maybe can't volunteer their time but can spare a few bucks. Every little bit counts.
Absolutely. They're also encouraging people to become like a volunteer ambassador, spreading the word, getting their own networks fired up.
And of course, the most important action of all, voting early and making sure our friends and family are doing the same. Because let's be real, elections matter. They decide who has the power to make decisions about our kids' futures.
Couldn't agree more. The Setzer Group, they're throwing down the gauntlet asking, what are you going to do to make education better for everyone?
That's a question we should all be asking ourselves.
Yeah.
Because if we don't show up, if we stay silent, well, who's going to fight for the things that matter? This deep dive, I think it's a really good reminder that we all have a part to play in creating the future we want to see.